Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. It's been 4 days since one of the biggest mass shootings in history. Most people still have more questions than answers about the gunman and particularly his motive. But if you've been watching any of the late-night comedy shows or certain cable news outlets, you know those mysteries have been solved already. According to them, the real perpetrators are law-abiding gun owners and the organizations that represent them. Not an overstatement. Watch this.
Do you feel like they're complicit, the GOP, the NRA, in the gun epidemic we're seeing in America?
Of course they are. Of course they are.
Break from the NRA, which is making things worse, and work with us to get something done.
Let's face it, the reason we don't have gun safety measures in the United States today is because of the NRA.
Well, Chris Cox is the executive director of the NRA Institute for Legislative Action, and he joins us on the set tonight. How do you feel when you see that, Chris? You watch 58 people murdered in public, and then you see yourself personally blamed for those murders.
Tucker, the American people are struggling. They're grieving, and so are the 5 million men and women of the National Rifle Association. The truth is that there are NRA members at that concert. There were NRA members shot at that concert, and NRA members murdered at that concert. So the American people are looking for answers, and so are we.
So the NRA that was blamed for the shootings, was the shooter himself an NRA member? Have you checked?
Of course not. And that's the one thing that's consistent, is they blame the one organization whose members don't commit the crimes.
Huh. So you know that for certain?
Yes.
Okay. Then why are people blaming you? What's the agenda, do you think?
Well, you know, the agenda, Dianne Feinstein said it herself when she said if I had 51 votes, Mr. and Miss America, turn them all in, that's what she would do. And look, there are legitimate questions.
Turn them all in, meaning turn your guns in.
Turn your guns in. And right now, the American people are looking for answers, but the American people are also looking for their Second Amendment. They're looking for Congress to respect the Second Amendment, and that's why we're calling on Congress to do something. Let ATF do their job, and Congress needs to do their job. Allow good, honest people the ability to defend themselves, pass reforms like national right to carry reciprocity, and then have a broader conversation about what we can do to keep people safer. Because if we go down this road of gun control, we can look at it. You know, universal background checks. This guy passed background checks. Well, let's go the route of California, where they've banned semi-autos, banned magazines, pushed waiting periods, they have ammo registration, but that didn't stop a massacre in San Bernardino, and it didn't stop a massacre in Santa Barbara. So they say, well, let's look a little bit further. You know, let's look at Europe and let's implement European-style gun control. Well, you know what? That's what they did in Paris when someone came in with fully automatic machine guns and hand grenades and murdered people there. There's a consequence to this, Tucker, and the consequence is good, honest people are left defenseless. The National Rifle Association exists to make sure that doesn't happen in America.
So what is the solution?
Well, the solution is to make sure that we address the underlying problems. This distraction of gun control does nothing to keep people safe. Gun control is a failed policy. We've tried it, and it's safe to say that it doesn't keep people safe. So do we need to have a broader conversation about activities that actually will? Do we need to have a broader conversation about Hollywood? You know, that NRA spends millions of dollars every year teaching safe and responsible gun ownership, and Hollywood makes billions promoting and glorifying gun violence. And then the same hypocrites come in and suggest that we're to blame for this. So there needs to be an honest conversation about solutions that work, and one of those solutions is to make sure the Second Amendment is supported, protected, and that law-abiding good people have the ability to use and carry a gun for self-defense.
So I talked to a number of different people today who legitimately know a lot about guns. None of them lives here in Washington. And every one of them said the same thing about bump stocks, that they're ludicrous. That one of them said to me, I'd rather face someone with a bump stock than someone firing semi-automatically. They make rifles less accurate. Why then the focus on then? Why then has NRA apparently said it'd be willing to back banning them? Is that relevant to what we saw?
Well, here's what the National Rifle Association said, and we need to look at the facts here. The Barack Obama's administration approved the sale of bump stocks and these other devices. What we've said is ATF needs to do their job. ATF needs to look, and if there is technology that's come to the market that allow for a semi-automatic rifle to function as a fully automatic rifle, they need to be regulated differently. We didn't talk about banning anything. We talked about ATF going back and reviewing whether or not these are in compliance with federal law, and if not, let's look at working together and figuring out a way to address this moving forward. At the same time, Congress needs to do their job and make sure that they're going with meaningful solutions to these underlying problems, including respecting the Second Amendment, and we're going to be there making sure we protect the Second Amendment.
So you all keep very close track of how guns are used in the country and compile statistics on them. Are you aware of other crimes where so-called bump stocks have been used?
Well, no, we're not, and truthfully, there's not a whole lot of people out there who own these things, but again, it gets away from the broader conversation. This conversation about gun control is intentional. Dianne Feinstein's desperate to move the conversation towards gun control and away from Congress's failure and the last administration's failure to keep people safe. Now is the time that the American people want answers. We want to be part of that. We want to be part of a constructive conversation, but part of that conversation has to be not only respecting the rights of law-abiding people, acknowledging that law-abiding people aren't the ones out there causing problems, and making sure that law-abiding people have the right to defend themselves. That's what the Second Amendment's all about, and that's what we're here for.
So here's a sincere, totally sincere and non-political question. We're about the same age. Shootings like this did not occur when we were kids. Same country. What has changed? What is this about? Why are we seeing these?
Tucker, that's a conversation that's happening at dinner tables and in living rooms all over the country. I'm sure it's happened in yours. It's certainly happened in mine. And I don't know the answer. And I think we need to look at the broader conversation and have a broader conversation about a violent culture, about what's happened with gratuitous violence out of Hollywood, what's happened with prescription drugs. I don't know the answer to these things, but we certainly need to look at all of these areas while at the same time recognizing and being honest enough with one another that if we've tried something and it's failed, it's time to move on. We've banned semi-automatics in this country for 10 years. We banned high-capacity magazines. Bill Clinton's own Justice Department said it had no impact on crime. So let's be honest enough with one another and trust the American people to have an honest conversation. Let's work together, have Congress do their job. And on these side issues, if ATF needs to look at something that functions as a fully automatic weapon, they're the ones who approved it. They need to look at it. That's not what the National Rifle Association's focused on. We're focused on keeping Congress out of Second Amendment freedoms, keeping Congress focused on expanding the rights of law-abiding people to protect themselves and their families. That's what the American people want, and that's what the National Rifle Association wants.
Chris Cox, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Tucker.
Appreciate it. Well, the left normally responds to terror attacks and mass shootings with calls to do something about gun violence. While they're rarely clear on what doing something means, most of us understand what it means, which is if the left had its way, only the government and the bodyguards who protect rich liberals would have guns. The left is starting to say pretty much that out loud. In the New York Times today, columnist Bret Stephens wrote a piece entitled "Repeal the Second Amendment." On Facebook, Michael Moore proposed, quote, a new amendment to our Constitution that repeals the ancient and outdated Second Amendment. The Nation magazine tweeted out a piece titled, "The Second Amendment was never meant to protect an individual's right to a gun." Avery Gardner works for one of the best-known gun control groups, the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, and she joins us tonight. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker. Great to be here.
So you all filed, I think, a friend of the court brief the last time this came before the Supreme Court and argued that the Second Amendment does not, in fact, protect individual gun ownership. It's been interpreted that way in two different decisions, as you well know. Do you think that Americans have a constitutional right to own firearms?
The Supreme Court has said that Americans who are law-abiding and safe can have a gun in their home. I respect that. I'm a lawyer by training, and I respect what the Supreme Court tells us about the Constitution and what it means. We at the Brady Campaign do not want to take away the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding people. What we want to do is make it much more difficult for dangerous people, for criminals, to have guns and have easy access to them. That's what we think is the common sense solution here.
So you all obviously have a lot to say about what we saw in Las Vegas Sunday night, raising money on it. A lot of people on the left are raising a lot of money on this. What legislative solutions that you're proposing would have prevented what we saw, the tragedy we saw on Sunday night?
One of the most important things we need to do as a nation is improve our background check system, but based on what we know right now, that might not have stopped this shooter from acquiring his guns. That is, though, the most important piece of legislation that we should be talking about as a nation. You know, Tucker, 90% of Americans support improving the background check system.
I don't want to do a segment on polling. I want to do a segment on what happened, the tragedy, one of the largest mass shootings ever on Sunday night.
The deadliest, yes.
Right. So you're seeing people, and Brady Campaign included, I was just on your website, saying, we need to do something. What would have prevented that?
We don't know all of the facts about this shooting.
We know
yet,
a lot. We know a lot of facts about the
Sure.
shooting. So
well,
what would have
a
prevented it?
couple of things. First,
Yeah.
it appears that the shooter used these bump stocks. What those do is turn another kind of a weapon into the functional equivalent of a machine gun. If we had regulation, if we had stricter control of those bump stocks, maybe fewer people would have died.
Maybe more would have died, actually, because if you talk to people who know a lot about guns, they say, you know, pros don't even fire on fully automatic because you can't hit anything. So
they make them very inaccurate.
Look, I'm not defending bump stocks. I'm just saying, let's be real. That,
okay.
you know, okay. So,
let
but
me
what
give you
would have
another
prevented
example.
it? Okay, yeah, please.
There's something else that is a common thread through a lot of these shootings, and that is large capacity magazines. What we see in many of these shootings is that the killer is able to fire 20, 30, 40, or hundreds of bullets, and in many cases doing so with dozens and dozens before having to reload. These large capacity magazines aren't used in hunting. They aren't supported by most responsible gun owners.
But,
so we should
I don't know if you know whether it's supported by most responsible gun. I mean, look, this guy had dozens of full magazines left over. His problem was not that he didn't have enough ammunition. It takes just a second to switch out a magazine, as you know. I mean, we can debate that, but is there an answer? Those aren't answers, as you know. You're smart. Like, is there anything that would have prevented this? Everyone's jumping up and down and saying we could have prevented this if only Congress had the will. And I'm asking you a very straightforward question: what could Congress have done to have prevented this?
We shouldn't, as a nation, be focused on what could have prevented the last shooting. We need to be focused on what could prevent the next shooting.
We've had a bunch of mass shootings, okay, and they're terrifying, and they really hurt the country, and they kill people.
They
so,
do.
Knowing what they all have in common, you do this for a living.
I do.
Let's just take the last, 10. What laws should be on the books that would have prevented those? This is a real question. This is not I'm not baiting you or trapping you.
You're not. I'm happy to answer it.
Yeah.
So the Virginia Tech shooting is a great example of exactly the sort of situation you're talking about.
Okay, but that was 10 years ago. We've had a lot of shootings. Okay.
We've had many, but you asked for an example. I'd like to give you one. In that case, we found out that there were gaps in our background check system, and Congress passed a law called the Nix Improvement Act, which was signed by President Bush, to encourage states to get better data into the background check system, data that might have stopped that shooter from acquiring his gun. So we know there is legislation.
But I mean, the truth is, as you know, Cook County did a study on this, the biggest study ever done. It was 2013. Cook County is the county where Chicago is, but one of the highest murder rates in the Western Hemisphere. And they found, you know what percentage of criminals had bought their gun in a place that could even offer a background check? Less than 2%. So it's irrelevant. They got it from straw purchasers, which were never prosecuted by DOJ, as you know.
And they should be.
They should be. They haven't been. They stole them. I mean, they're criminals. Background checks would have not prevented any crimes in Chicago based on that survey, really. So, like, is that all you have? No, I'm serious.
Sure. Background checks have blocked 3 million sales of attempted sales of guns.
But we still have all these mass shootings, and we still have all these shootings across the country.
But the fact that a solution isn't going to stop all gun violence doesn't mean it isn't worth pursuing. But look, stopping gun deaths is a goal worthy of our great nation.
Okay,
we need to make this a safer America.
What bothers me is that the Brady campaign, using misleading statistics, pretends that it has the answer, and that the only reason that we're not getting to that answer is because the evil people over at the NRA are somehow getting rich, making America more dangerous. And it's just a lie. There's no obvious answer, and you know it. And this is a really complex, confusing, tragic situation, and no one really knows what to do about these mass shooters, unless you've got some secret that you haven't revealed, do you?
Tucker, I don't like being called a liar. Let me tell you how this works, right? We need a much more comprehensive, stronger system of background checks in this country. It starts by expanding background checks to all gun sales. 1 in 5 guns in America today is sold without a background check. Here's what that means. That means that a convicted felon getting out of jail tomorrow could go and buy a gun from a private seller without a background check.
But as I just said, that's not what actually happens. It's not what actually happens. It's not what's happened in any of these mass shootings, and it's not what happens in crime. We have the numbers on this. That's not, look, I'm not arguing even against it. I'm just saying that is not relevant to the crime and the murders that are taking place with guns in America right now.
There was a massacre in Charleston in a church a couple of years ago.
There was.
That was by a shooter who got a gun because of what's called the Charleston loophole. The FBI needed another day to determine whether or not he was eligible to buy a gun, and it turned out that he wasn't. But because under federal law, he could go ahead and get that gun after 3 business days had expired, he got his gun, and he went and killed a lot of people. So it's another example.
This was a lunatic racist who wanted to kill people, was dead set on it, and you know for a fact it's pretty easy to buy a gun criminally because there are hundreds of millions of guns in America. So this is my last question to you. That's the bottom line truth, and you know it better than anybody because you do it for a living. There are hundreds of millions of guns, hundreds of millions of high-capacity magazines. What do you do about that? Are you going to try and, because like no law short of taking those away from citizens is ever going to have a meaningful effect. Are you willing to talk about your real desire, which is to take guns away from people?
I do not want to take guns away from law-abiding Americans. Look, we have a tradition, a history, a culture of hunting. We have a tradition and a history for many people of shooting sports of other kinds.
And of self-protection.
And we have a Second Amendment. Yeah. There is nothing that we want more than to focus on keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people, keeping guns out of the hands of criminals.
Good.
That's what we're focused on.
I'm totally for that. The overstatement and the pretending that we could just fix everything if we were all people of goodwill, that's just not true, and you know it.
I don't know how to stop every gun death in America, but okay. I know how we could make it a lot better, and that's what we need to do as a nation.
Okay. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Fox News' Trace Gallagher has been following every development in Las Vegas where he is tonight, and he joins us as he has every night this week. What's the latest, Trace?
Well, Tucker, we're continuing to follow this breaking news, these reports that Stephen Paddock was actually planning to use a car bomb. The report did not specify any targets, but we know that in his car, in the valet of the Mandalay Bay Hotel, they found 1,600 rounds of ammunition, ammonium nitrate, as well as 50 pounds of tannerite. We have also confirmed tonight that Stephen Paddock did book a room at a Chicago hotel back in August to coincide with the Lollapalooza concert. He booked the Blackstone Hotel. It's 21 stories, overlooks Grant Park, which is the venue of the concert. And the Blackstone says that he reserved the room. He asked for a park view, but he did not show up for the reservation. 1 week before the shooting here at the Mandalay Bay down on the concert, he also booked a room in downtown Las Vegas at a hotel that overlooked the Life is Beautiful concert, though it is unclear if he was in the room while the concert was going on. The Clark County Sheriff has gone on the record saying that he believes Stephen Paddock did have an accomplice in all this. He said he would be Superman if he did not have an accomplice and pulled this off on his own. We have now learned that in the days running up to this shooting that Stephen Paddock was gambling very heavily inside the Mandalay Bay for hours at a time, 7, 8 hours at a time, also drinking heavily, and that he was with a female companion. Police are now looking for that female companion, and there are reports tonight that his girlfriend, Marilou Danley, told the FBI in her 5.5 hours of interviews yesterday that he may have had some mental issues, that she would see him on the bed moaning things like, "Oh my God," and screaming, "Oh my God." 4 days later, Tucker, still no motive for this mass shooting. Tucker.
That is an amazing fact and a terrifying fact. Thank you, Trace, for your nightly updates. Appreciate it. Well, the Attorney General of Nevada, Adam Laxalt, is participating, of course, in the investigation into the shooting at the highest level. He's here next to tell us what he knows. Also, LA is famous for bad traffic, but never more so than today when illegal immigrant protesters made it much worse by blocking streets in a country that is not their own. That story is straight ahead. Investigators have spent 4 days searching desperately for a motive to explain the horrifying killing spree in Las Vegas Sunday night. Nevada Attorney General Adam Laxalt is playing a major role in that investigation, of course, and he joins us tonight with the latest. Mr. Attorney General, thanks a lot for coming on. So I'm sure you've got to be as anxious as anyone to understand why this man Paddock did something like this. Are you any closer to figuring that out?
You know, I'd like to correct at least one thing that was said in the last segment. You know, the sheriff did not say there's any evidence of an accomplice. I think he was expressing what we all feel, which is it's hard to believe that a crime of this magnitude could have been done by one person. But
yes,
as of right this moment, it is still a single person operation. And you know, dealing with this horrific tragedy here in our great city is it's been a real shocker for all of us, but people have really pulled together to try to get some answers that we know that we want and the country as a whole want.
So ISIS, as ludicrous as this sounds, I mean, I think we're all duty-bound to take it seriously as a possibility, has issued a third statement on Stephen Paddock, saying that not only was he acting on its behalf, but he converted to Islam 6 months ago. Doesn't mean it's true, but, excuse me, it doesn't mean it's worth following up. Is there any evidence that that's true?
Well, you know, from what I understand, Al-Qaeda, when they would actually claim something, that was always 100%. ISIS now has a pattern of falsely claiming that they are responsible for activities. You know, as of right now, with everything that is publicly available, there is no link. You cannot see anything that publicly shows that there's any link to radical terrorism.
Does it seem strange? Well, of course it seems strange. These reports that he had basically no digital footprint of any kind, at least a public one, social media. But does that mean that he was never online? Is there any indication that he was communicating somehow in a way that's less obvious in social media?
I can only say what's being said so far, which is, you know, he has virtually no footprint. And he does not fit the profile of what we'd expect in an incident like this. That's what makes it so baffling. A 64-year-old man who lives in, you know, rural Nevada. You just wouldn't expect something like this. But, you know, the FBI is working around the clock. And I'd like to remind your listeners that, you know, it took 9 days for them to finish the processing the scene in Orlando. You know, we're still only 3 days away. I mean, this is a catastrophic, horrific thing for our city and our state, and so we all want to get to the bottom of this, but our sheriff and the FBI are doing an incredible job pushing and pushing to try to find answers.
Right. Though within minutes, I think it was clear to people watching when the shooter in Orlando, for example, said he was doing it on behalf of Allah. That was kind of a clue to the rest of us that, you know, there was a reason. Is there any indication what he was doing in the roughly hour between the last shots he fired at the security guard on the other side of the door and the moment that police burst through his door?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happened there was some discussion about why it took so long for them to breach the door, but it's important to understand that once you saw that there was a security camera in place, that once they got to the door, the shooting stopped. You know, had the shooting continued, they would have breached instantly and they would have, of course, taken the shooter out. But because they got to the door, the shooting stopped. And so what he was doing in that period of time, we don't know, but we do know the reason they took that extra time is they wanted, since there was not continual shooting, they wanted to make sure that there wasn't an explosive device set at the door to kill more of our first responders.
No, that's an excellent point. Adam Laxalt, the Attorney General of the state, thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, the Australian press caught up with the family of the gunman's girlfriend, who is herself an Australian citizen. A report directly from there, coming up next. Well, there's not a person watching this story out of Las Vegas who isn't really anxious to know why it happened. And unfortunately, we still don't know that at this hour. But there is a lot of detail we do know, and it's being collected assiduously by the Wall Street Journal's Jason Bellini. He joins us tonight with new details on the background of the shooting suspect. Hey, Jason.
Hi, Tucker. So now we're 4 nights after the Las Vegas massacre, and the mystery is still really deep on what his motives were. But we are learning more details about his life. For example, the journal spoke to people familiar with Paddock's gambling, and they said he almost exclusively played video poker, and he was apparently quite good at it. And so good, in fact, that at least one casino cut down on the perks they offered him. His brother Eric said that he approached video poker like a job. He didn't drink too much, mostly asking for water and smoothies. And these same casino workers also say that he was a really intensely private man. But that said, he met his girlfriend while she was working as a hostess. This was in one of those high-limit gambling rooms at the Atlantis in Reno. So where did he get the money that he gambled with? Well, in the early 1990s, Paddock began investing in California real estate. He purchased a number of rental properties. And in 2014, this is according to the buyer that we reached out to, Paddock and his partner sold a Dallas apartment complex for more than $8 million. So he was a wealthy guy. That's how some of his friends describe him. Now, however interesting all these details are, they certainly don't add up to anything approaching the profile of a mass shooter, right? We also know that 33 of the 47 weapons recovered from his hotel suite and his 2 Nevada homes, those were purchased since last October, but he never used any of them at the only shooting range within 20 miles of his home. Now, authorities say it doesn't appear that Paddock bought any of those firearms illegally. Investigators are continuing to examine his mental health history. The Las Vegas Review-Journal reported today that back in June, a doctor prescribed Paddock the anti-anxiety medication Valium. Tucker?
It's just all these potential leads that don't seem to add up to a coherent picture of a shooter. And apparently he underwent pretty dramatic weight loss recently, sometimes an indication of illness. Do we know anything about that? Does anyone suspect that perhaps he was physically ill in addition to being mentally ill?
In our reporting, no, we haven't heard more about that. And Valium as a prescription, that's pretty normal. So none of these particular details any of them are real red flags at the moment. And I have his girlfriend being interviewed, and yesterday the authorities were saying, well, we're hoping that will really clear things up for us. Well, apparently that hasn't.
Apparently not. Jason Bellini, Wall Street Journal. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
Well, the media down in Australia were able to catch up with one of the sisters of Stephen Paddock's girlfriend. The sisters are, like the girlfriend herself, Australian citizens. Here's what they told Australia's 7 News. Watch.
In that sense, I thank him for sparing my sister's life, but that won't be to compensate 59 people's life. No one can put the puzzles together, no one except Mary Lou, because Steve is not here to talk anymore. Only Mary Lou can maybe help.
Sharon Gadella of Australia's 7 News was the one who spoke to Mary Lou Danley's sisters. She joins us tonight from Brisbane, Australia. So, Sharon, the sisters sound like they were completely shocked by this story.
They were, Tucker. They just couldn't believe it when they heard that it was Stephen Paddock who was the gunman in this Las Vegas shooting. They said to me that they found him to be a very nice man. Their sister had said he was nice to her, he spoiled her, he treated her well. They had had some meetings with him. They said whenever they met him, he was very respectful of them. They said he was a very shy man, a very insular man. He didn't say a lot. They said he used to give one-word answers to questions when asked. But they said they had absolutely no idea, and there was no hint that anything was wrong in their relationship. Mary Lou had said she loved him, she madly loved him, they said. And they were just shocked that Stephen Paddock was the gunman.
Did they, just again, looking for motive, did they mention that he had interest in religion or politics or anything beyond gambling?
No, I asked them that. I asked them if they felt that he was mentally unstable. Had Mary Lou ever told them that, you know, he was having mental problems, that he had gambling debts, that he had financial problems? I asked all those questions and they said they had absolutely no knowledge whatsoever that anything like that was happening in his life. They said Mary Lou had expressed happiness in the relationship. You know, as I said before, he treated her very well. They just couldn't fathom that he could do something so evil.
What did they say about their sister?
They said she was a good woman. They really loved their sister, and that's one of the reasons they actually spoke to us. You know, they were reluctant speakers in this. They didn't really want to talk to the media, but they wanted it known that their sister was a good woman. She was a loving woman. And they said that if Mary Lou had ever suspected anything, she would have gone to authorities. They said she was someone who, you know, if she'd known he had that many guns in the house, she would never have allowed it. She would have been very scared of all of that. And they felt that if he had been collecting these guns the way that he had, that Mary Lou would have had no knowledge of that whatsoever.
Amazing. His own brothers did not give Stephen Paddock the same ringing endorsement, from what I can tell. Sharon, thank you very much for that update. Appreciate it.
No problems, Tucker. Thanks.
Well, Governor Jerry Brown of California officially made his state a sanctuary for illegal aliens today. That did not stop illegal immigrants there, activists, from blocking intersections and shutting down traffic on the west side of Los Angeles. An illegal immigrant advocate is here to tell us why it's a good thing to do things like that. Stay tuned. Well, if you read the New York Times regularly, you know for a fact that illegal immigrant dreamers are always doctors, engineers, valedictorians, Eagle Scouts, and Navy SEALs. Well, it turns out some of them are actually unemployed protesters who like to block intersections and snarl traffic, like today. Take a look.
Right, now we see for blocks the backup of traffic being built up on Wilshire, right?
Let them go! Let them go! Let them go!
That took place, strangely enough, on the very same day that Governor Jerry Brown of California made his state a sanctuary officially from federal immigration law. Cesar Vargas is the first illegal immigrant lawyer in the state of New York, and he joins us tonight. Cesar, thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Tucker.
So this makes, I gotta say, I think normal people a lot less sympathetic to so-called dreamers. The idea that you're in a country illegally and you're standing in the middle of an intersection preventing citizens from getting to work. You're making basically violent demands in public when you're not even a citizen. I mean, do you see why maybe this is a counterproductive strategy and kind of offensive?
Well, regardless of whether you agree with the protests or not, they have a constitutional right to express their opinion. But to the point about...
No, actually, wait, stop. Stop with this. I mean, you're a lawyer. They don't have a constitutional right to block me from getting to work in the middle of a public street. I'm sorry, they don't.
You may disagree with it, but again, this is about actually
not... No, it's not disagreeing with it. I'm giving you the fact. You don't have a constitutional right to stand in the middle of the street and prevent traffic from going.
Absolutely, you do. This is about making sure that... And again,
then why were they arrested? Well, I thought you were a lawyer.
Well, absolutely. Obviously they're doing the civil disobedience, and obviously they're expressing. That's why they're being arrested, because obviously they're enforcing the law. But again,
okay, so they don't have a wait. I mean, just wait. Hold on. I wouldn't stop you on this small point if you weren't an attorney, the first illegal alien attorney in New York. But just to be clear, you don't have a constitutional right to block traffic. You have a constitutional right as a citizen to express your views. It's protected by the First Amendment, thank God. But you don't have a constitutional right to get in people's way on a public street. Period. So I guess my question is, if I tried this in Mexico or Venezuela, Honduras, Nicaragua, China, name a country, that would be insane. If I showed up in someone else's country and said, I have a right to influence your political system, they say, you're not even a citizen, buzz off. I'm blocking traffic now until you pay attention to me. Like, no one would put up with that except us, right?
Well, Tucker, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, they have a constitutional right to express their freedom to speak any opinion, and obviously they're engaged in civil disobedience, and at the end, they're getting arrested. And regardless, the Constitution protects them whether or not they have immigration status. So let's stick to the point on this.
Look, it doesn't protect their right to keep me from getting to work or getting home to see my kids. It's annoying, it's illegal, it's indefensible, probably not worth you defending it. But look, again, by definition, non-citizens do not have a right to influence our legislative system. Only citizens have that right. That's the difference between a citizen and a non-citizen, and you're trying to erase it. And you can see why American citizens might resent that, can't you?
Well, you're wrong, Tucker. U.S. citizens have the right to vote. Absolutely. They have the right to actually cast a ballot. But every person has the right to voice their opinion in this country. That's what makes this country great. The U.S. Constitution does not say, hey, the First Amendment applies only to U.S. citizens. Am I correct? The Second Amendment does not apply to only U.S.
Washington
citizens.
is like basically paralyzed over concerns of foreign interference in our last campaign by the government of Russia right now.
Absolutely.
And the reason people are upset about it,
influence with the president.
The reason people are upset is because Russians are not Americans. They're not American citizens. They don't get to influence who runs this country, what laws we have, how we live. Only Americans get to do that. Why is this different? I don't understand.
Well, on one hand, we had the Russian government colluding with many of the Trump administration in his campaign. That's one story. And on this hand, we have young people. We have people who are expressing their views on a specific issue for certain rights. And that is what we need to have at hand.
But why isn't Russia doing the same thing? You just have, look, Russians have a First Amendment right, according to you, I guess, to block my way home after work. But
well, they don't have a right to block on the way home. That's why this protester got arrested.
Right,
and I think, but they do have the right
thank you for finally admitting that.
Themselves.
No, but look, the point is the same. That if you're not an American citizen, you don't get to shape, influence my laws. You don't get to choose my leaders. You don't get to run my country. Only Americans do. That's why there's a difference between citizens and non-citizens. And once again, you're trying to erase that difference. There's no other country in the world that will put up with this kind of nonsense, but we're too nice, and therefore we do. Do you see my point?
This is why the United States is a very special place, because even though U.S. citizens have the right to vote, even though they have everything, we have the right to, many people, to express their views, to be protected against unreasonable search and seizures, and we have certain constitutional rights that it applies to everyone, and that's fundamental.
Are you a citizen, by the way, Caesar?
I am not. But I do hold the Constitution that applies to everyone.
So when you say we, it's not really we. You're not a citizen of this country.
I am an American.
You seem like a nice guy and everything.
Story.
No, but you're not an American. I mean, there's a legal definition here. I'm not attacking you personally.
What is the legal definition for being an American?
The legal definition is citizenship. That's what the definition is. It's really simple.
No, absolutely.
Are you a citizen? Can you vote in our elections, or
I cannot vote in the elections, but I can voice my opinion as an American. And I am going to be an American pretty soon, because I'm going to continue to advocate and to represent my community and to demand, just as many Americans have demanded
you're in someone else's country, and you get, again, I'm not attacking you personally.
Of course.
I just think the distinction is a meaningful one.
We want to be very clear of what it means to be an American. Being American does not mean a piece of paper. Being American is about holding certain values, about freedom, about liberty.
You actually don't hold those values. It's about believing in the rule of law, and you don't. So actually, you just invalidated your claim to Americanness, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, Caesar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Tucker.
Most people tune into late-night comedy shows to be amused. They're getting less amusing by the day. Last night, an interview with Hillary Clinton, hagiographic doesn't begin to describe it. There was slobber all over the set. It was disgusting. Happily, Greg Gutfeld is here to make sense of what happened. Stay tuned. You stay up late last night with the TV on, then you saw a show that hit a record-setting level of piety. Hillary Clinton appeared on The Tonight Show. Watch this.
Thank you, Hillary Clinton, for handling this difficult transition with more grace than I ever could have imagined. That being said, call me day or night and I will be there with a gallon of ice cream and 2 spoons to tell you, girl, you are so much better than him.
Thank you, Hillary Clinton, for being the Hillary Clinton of American politics.
I was with her, I'm still with her, and right now I literally am with her.
You've been a role model and an inspiration and a voice of reason in uncertain times. I could go on, but I'd like to get right to the point. Can I give you a hug?
It's like the Albanian parliament saluting Enver Hoxha. It's just, I feel sick. So Greg Gutfeld joins us to answer this question. So that's Jimmy Fallon's show. Jimmy Fallon, in my opinion, is very talented and always seemed totally apolitical and like a good guy.
And he can drink.
Yeah, and I mean, I've never heard a bad thing about Jimmy Fallon. I doubt he wanted to put on a show like that, but he had no choice. So what's the answer?
What I don't know. The funny side note that a lot of people don't know is that Hillary, when she brought those letters home, Bill asked if they came with phone numbers. So if there is,
he should have put that on the show. That would have been good.
And I just came up with that. You know, if there is a hell, that segment is on a permanent loop. I think when I was looking at it, I thought that it was a skit, and the payoff was going to be a Trump impersonator was going to come out and say thanks, you know, something like that. But when I realized that it was real, it just made it. This is how far it's gotten. That they have to appeal to not to their audience, but to their peers. They are, what you heard from those girls' voices, those are the people that work on TV shows. And that's the mentality, the sensibility. They're earnest. They really do believe it. They believe that she was shafted. They should be mad at her. This is what I don't get. They should be mad at her for running a lousy campaign, because her lousy campaign got Donald Trump into the White House, or one of the main reasons. They should be resentful. They shouldn't be sitting there and treating her like Mrs. Claus.
But what about her? So put yourself in Hillary's position. You go on the show, all these people come up and suck up to you. Greg Gutfeld, I have your face tattooed on my arm. You know what I mean? I love you more than I love myself. Aren't you uncomfortable?
You know, it's funny. Lou Dobbs has a tattoo of me on his chest. When we're at the beach, it's a bit embarrassing. But you know what? I learned to live with that sort of thing. Here's the issue. This is the world's first anti-victory tour. You know, it's like a really lame parade where there's just a car, a donkey, and two guys on a bicycle, and it just goes forever. It is kind of, it's funny, pathetic, but also it's wonderful, because when you think about it, wouldn't you rather have her do this than be in the Oval Office? Given the alternative, she could be somewhere else doing this. Instead, she's doing this on what's his face, Fallon's show. But I don't remember Mitt Romney getting letters on TV.
How much does Fallon hate himself? I mean, he's an amusing guy, probably just wants to do his thing, do his art, and instead he's roped into this wooden propaganda.
Yeah, I don't know him that well. I ran into him at a bar, literally, and we wrestled for 5 minutes on the floor of a bar in Midtown. But that's another story for another time. The fact is, I don't think he's a left-winger. I don't think he's a liberal. I think he's apolitical, and I think that he's just playing the game because he's seeing what Colbert is doing, and he's watching how emotion is putting Kimmel. The political writers in D.C. are going fanboy over Kimmel.
I know.
And that means so much to Hollywood types.
I know. And art dies in the process. Greg Gutfeld,
who's
one of the funniest people. Who's art? Great to see you, man. We'll be right back. Hard to believe an entire hour has passed, but that is the nature of time, sadly. Tune in again tomorrow night at 8 and every night at 8 for the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. Sean Hannity is live from Vegas right now.